Good morning and welcome to this formal meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Rob Kendrick and I'm Chairman of the committee. Welcome to all members and officers present today, and in particular I'd like to welcome Dr. Emil van der Zee to his first meeting of the committee since being re-elected as Parent Governor Representative. The video feed of this meeting is being broadcast via the County Council's website, and I'd also like to welcome members of the press and public who are watching our meeting online today. As the meeting is being streamed in the usual way, I'd like to remind you all that your comments will remain accessible online and can be reported by the media. Welcome also to the following senior officers from Children's Services: Heather Sandy, Executive Director, Children's Services; Linda Dennett, Assistant Director, Children's Health and Commissioning; Joe Kavanagh, Assistant Director, Early Help; Sarah Nardone, Assistant Director, Sector-Led Improvement; and Martin Smith, Assistant Director, Children's Education. I'd also like to welcome Councillor Stephen Rowe, Executive Support Councillor for Children's Services, Community Safety, Procurement and Migration, who is attending today's meeting. I'd like to begin with the usual health and safety announcement. There's no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through reception into the front car park and then wait for further instructions. And can I also remind everyone to please ensure your mobiles and other devices are on silent mode. Also, when you're invited to speak, can you please ensure you switch your microphone on? Otherwise, those attending the meeting via Teams and members of the press and public listening to our meeting online won't be able to hear you. And please be aware you need to speak directly into the microphone to be heard. If you wish to speak during the meeting, can you please raise your hand, and my Vice Chairman, Councillor William Gray, will make a note. So if we can move on to the business on today's agenda. Item 1 is apologies for absence and replacement members. Jess, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Alan Briggs, Councillor Patricia Bradwell, Martin Kyle and Tara Jones, the Assistant Director for Children's Safeguarding. And
thank you. No other apologies? No, that's great. Item 2 is declarations of members' interests. Members of the committee are reminded they need only declare any relevant interests which have not been declared on their declaration of pecuniary interest form. Do any members wish to declare an interest? No? Fine, thanks very much. Item 3, minutes of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee held on the 21st of July 2023. This is to confirm and sign the minutes from the meeting of the committee held on the 21st of July as a correct record. Do I have a proposer and seconder? Councillor Whittington and Councillor Sear. Thank you very much. All those in favour, would you please raise your hand? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you, that's the minutes agreed. We now move on to item 4 on the agenda, announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Chief Officers. I have only one announcement to make, and that is that need to make you aware that I'm intending to have our customary 10-minute break before item 7. So that's before item 7, the 10-minute break this morning. Executive Council announcements. Are there any Executive Council announcements for Councillor Stephen Rowe on behalf of Councillor Mrs. Patricia Bradwell? Councillor Rowe.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to update the scrutiny panel. I don't know if you're aware, but Andrew Morris, Head of Service, Care Experience, Young Children and Young People, and I have been going round district councils. We've just been to North Kesteven where we gave a presentation about corporate parenting. We basically went over cared for children in their area and the obligations on district councillors to support those children. So to date, we've done City of Lincoln, Boston, South Kesteven, North East Links and North Kesteven. We've got a few more to do and we're pushing on with that, but we have been extremely well received wherever we've gone and well supported by our colleagues at district councils. So I just wanted to do that update. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks very much, Councillor Rowe. That's very encouraging. Next item is Chief Officer announcements. Are there any Chief Officer announcements from Heather Sandy, Executive Director, Children's Services? Heather?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to give the committee an update on the RAC situation. You'll have seen in the press that there has been a lot of disruption in schools across the country. I'm pleased to confirm we have not got any identified RAC in Lincolnshire schools. All of our maintained schools have been checked and they're all absolutely fine. The academies are the responsible body for their own buildings, so they are checking their own buildings and returning those to the Department for Education, and we're not aware of any confirmed RAC in any of our academy schools. I'd also like to assure the committee that we have our property teams have gone further than that. They've also checked our children's centres, our children's homes, the Lincolnshire Secure Unit, and again, no cases of RAC confirmed in Lincolnshire. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very reassuring to hear. Thank you. If we can move on to item 5 on the agenda today, Lincolnshire Secure Children's Home Land Purchase and Section 203. Now, this item can be found on pages 11 to 52 of the agenda pack and is for pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the Executive on the 3rd of October. The actions required of the committee today are to, firstly, consider the attached report and determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the Executive as set out in the report, and secondly, agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive in relation to this item. The 3 recommendations to the Executive are set out on page 15 of the agenda pack. Now, I just need to remind the committee that Appendix E is exempt. If the committee wishes to discuss this appendix, we will need to vote to move into exempt session. So can we please have questions and comments on the open report, which is and appendices A to D first? And if there are any questions or comments on Appendix E, can we please leave them until we have voted to go into exempt session? So I just wanted to make that clear. I'd like to invite Matthew Clayton, Interim Head of Capital Reform and Education Sufficiency, and Dave Pennington, Head of Property Development, to present this report. We also have Rachel Freeman, Head of Service for Children in Care and Residential Estates, and Matthew Stapleton, Senior Project Manager, Corporate Property, in attendance to help answer any questions. So it's over you to Matt to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes to provide an overview of progress to date on this project, share some slides and look at design development, and link today's paper back to when we've had previous discussions at this committee. Dave's then going to go through the key decisions that form the paper going to Executive. You may recall in December last year we brought a paper here seeking support to progress the plans and the business case for the proposed new secure children's home in Sleaford and to apply to the DFE for capital funding. The business case for the new home and the recommendations to apply for that funding were fully supported, and since then I'm delighted to inform you all that the grant funding to progress works up to main works has been approved by the DFE, and planning permission for the project was approved last month. Some of you may have seen the actual very positive stories that were in the local media, which was good to see. The paper and presentation in December included a very high-level summary of progress to date around the design and site, so we thought it would be a good opportunity today just to do a very quick overview, provide some context to the key decisions in the exec paper. If you just go to the first slide, please, Jess. It's a reminder of the site that we're talking about today, just off Bone Mill Lane in Sleaford, access just off the A17, which is to the north of the site. The planning permission that was granted last month had some planning conditions for the site. The main one was in relation to upgrades related to the access road, which actually comes off the Bone Mill Lane junction off the A17 and in. If you go to the next slide, Jess, it's more easy to see that red road coming in is the access road, which has now been incorporated into the project as a whole and is included in the costs which are covered by the DFE, who are fully funding the project other than the purchase of the site itself. You can see the site layout there, and where the building is still very similar to where it was when we last reported. That whole grey area to the south of the site is the secure unit site. It doesn't really show up on there, but the areas to the north, which are sort of light yellow, they're areas for future development potentially and could be looked at a later date. The next slide shows the layout, much the same as it was, you may recall the design, and that similar pattern from before. It's been developed much further in more detail. which I'm sure you can appreciate behind the scenes. There's loads of drawings that go behind all of these. Some of the changes we did have to make, we're looking at value engineering it down slightly to make it more cost effective and finding a balance between affordability and making sure that there's no impact on the facilities and what we're looking to achieve with this design and building. We did reduce some of the office accommodation on the first floor, but I'm really pleased to report that the DFE are funding this, have been very supportive of ensuring that all areas directly impacting on the young children and the journey that they're on have not been reduced in size or scope. So the education, the residential areas, the health and other areas have not been impacted, and good progress has been made on the design around those. The next slide just shows the external 3D view. Again, this has developed further from when we last brought it here. Clearly shows the main hub to the front with the grey, darker roof area, and then the 5 wings off the central area, which will accommodate the 28 beds across the 5 homes. Based on learning from existing secure children's homes across the country, and in fact further afield than that, the design takes best practice from across the sector, brings them all together into what will be a state-of-the-art facility and one of the most advanced of its kind. Finally, the next slide just gives some sample elevations and some pictures just to give a flavour of what it might look like, hopefully, when we get this built and through to completion. Before we get to that stage though, the last slide just highlights the 3 key decisions that today's paper is asking you to consider to enable this project to progress further. And I'll now hand over to Dave, who will take you through each of them. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Matt, very much. So I'll take all 3 key decisions in turn. The first, just as a reminder, is the purchase of the land. The second is the use of Section 203 of the Housing and Planning Act 2016, of which I'll probably just spend a little bit of time unpacking that for you. And then finally, the enabling works. Just as a reminder for the committee, in terms of the land purchase, we went through a very extensive site search back in 2018 and again in 2022. Looking at 300 sites for this particular development, and this is the site that we landed on, and that was the subject of a paper which you received earlier this year. And again, just as a reminder, back in February 2023 this year, we negotiated an option agreement with the landowner, and that option agreement secured the site for us, but it also compelled us to purchase the land once we'd successfully received planning permission, and we have successfully received planning permission. And also, once we'd finished the statutory judicial review period and that had expired, that's when we were looking to purchase the land. I'm not really going to say much more on that, except that we need the land to proceed with the development. I think that's fairly self-explanatory and obvious, so I'll move on to Section 203 and what that is. So, Section 203 is of the Housing and Planning Act 2016. As you'll see in paragraph 2.9 of the report, when we were negotiating with the land, it came to light at a relatively late stage that there are some restrictive covenants on the land. 2 restrictive covenants, in fact. One restricts the use of residential development on the site. This means that the children's home, which is classed as a residential development, couldn't be put on that site. And the second is around nuisance. As you'll see in further on the report, the nuisance covenant we don't believe poses much of a risk to this development, but it is the restrictive covenants around the use of residential development, which does pose a risk to this particular project. So we sought counsel advice, so we've been out to an external barrister over 3 times. We've been working with Legal Services Lincolnshire throughout this whole journey to guide us through this process. And the Act is, the 2016 Act allows local authorities to override restrictive covenants on sites. So we have the power as a local authority to override restrictive covenants. There are a number of tests that we have to meet to be able to use that power, and you'll see in paragraphs 214, 215, and those paragraphs around there that there are detailed a number of tests that we have to meet and the criteria by which we have to meet. We've been through the process, and again, you'll see detailed in the report that we believe, and again, guided by legal colleagues, we have met those tests and we have fulfilled all the criteria for the use of Section 203. We also have to meet the criteria for the use of compulsory purchase order. We're not compulsorily purchasing this land, but it is the same process by which we go through for the use of Section 203 as that of compulsory purchase order. So we also have to meet those tests as well. And again, you'll see in the body of the report that there are 4 or 5 tests that we have to meet, and again, we have met all those. Now, just by way of a bit of context, when we looked at the land originally was which was part of a much larger parcel of land, and it's been broken up over the years, and the bit that we're looking to purchase is effectively a rump of what was much bigger. And the covenant actually applies to the original parcel of land, which was much bigger. That means that when we override this restrictive covenant, we may have to compensate the adjacent landowners, and we believe there's around about 20 of those. We've been negotiating with some of those in the last 6 months or so, and we've been reaching out to all of them, and we've had very minimal response to that so far, because in the use of overriding the covenant, using this act, it means that we're effectively overriding their ability to exercise the covenant. However, compensation would be calculated based on the diminution of their land value. So what I mean by that is, if their existing land value suffered loss as a result of us building the secure home, then they might be entitled to compensation. We don't believe that there is any loss that they would suffer as a result of building that facility adjacent to their land. Appreciate this is quite a complex subject, and there may be lots of questions, and I'll invite those questions in a minute. But just to deal with that, the use of Section 203, I would characterise it as a managed risk. We've taken every approach that we can do as the local authority to minimise any risk of challenge. We've been guided by legal services, and I just to be open and transparent with the committee, there is still a risk of challenge even once the local authority has used Section 203. But because we've been negotiating, that risk of challenge would come from adjacent landowners, but because we've been negotiating, because we've been actively getting in touch with the adjacent landowners, by letter, by door knocking, and by email as well, we feel that risk is absolutely minimal, and doesn't pose a threat to this particular project. And finally, we need to enter into an enabling works contract to get this project going. So once we've purchased the land, at the same time, once we've used Section 203, then we look at an enabling works contract. And what does enabling works contract mean? It's quite common in large capital projects that we do this, and it basically means getting the site ready before we start construction proper. So if you draw your mind back to the image we showed earlier on, which showed the building at the southern half of the site, what we're doing is putting all the fencing in, making the access road, bringing that up to standard, and we're putting the site compound in and various other bits and bobs. The value of that is actually less than we predicted because the scope of that has been a negotiation between us and our highways colleagues over the last 4 to 6 weeks. And as you can appreciate, the paper was written a number of weeks ago, so that value has actually dropped significantly. But the third key decision is really to allow us to get the site ready for when construction starts proper early next year. Appreciate there's a lot of content in the report, and there may be some questions off the back of that, particularly around Section 203, so I'd like to invite the committee to ask any questions.
Thanks very much, Matt. Dave, I'd like to invite members to comment on the open report and appendices A to D. Councillor Gray, do we have any questions?
Nobody's showing yet, Mr. Chairman.
Can I just pitch in a question then? On paragraph 3.9, it mentions that the early enabling works will mean that the project can carry on at a pace that will enable the completion of the building within the DFE's agreed timescales. What are the agreed timescales with the DFE, and what will be the next steps once the land purchase and restrictive covenant have been sorted out?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in terms of the timescales, we're looking at starting construction on site very early next year, with it being completed at the start of 2026. So that's the first part of your question. Sorry, remind me the second part of your question. Yes, so sorry, in terms of the next steps, once these three key decisions have gone through, we will then come back to this committee with a full scheme appraisal at the back end of this year, which allows you to scrutinise the main works contract, and that will be for the totality of the project and the full sum for construction.
Thanks very much. Councillor Whittington, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I've actually got a couple of questions. First one is, obviously, I see that the cost of the enabling works is going to be sort of about £7.25 million. I can't see in the report any indication of how much the land purchase is going to be, because presumably that's going to be on top of that. Obviously, I appreciate.
I think that might be Appendix E.
All right, okay. My apologies. Okay, I won't ask that question then. But my second question then is really still around potentially, obviously, looking at this, the biggest risk we face is getting the Section 203 agreed and in place, because everything else follows from that. And I just need a little bit more reassurance because potentially, I'm guessing the neighbouring landowners could go to court, could try and get an injunction to stop this on the basis that we are, overriding the restrictive covenants. I just need just a bit more reassurance around that, because, you can go to one lawyer, one barrister, and he'll say one thing, but the reason why cases end up in court is because there's always potentially another side, and another argument that another barrister would actually make, or whatever. So really just a bit more reassurance about that, and what contingency plans we do have if this was to be sort of go to court, because potentially if this goes to, if one of the landowners does decide to go to court, that obviously throws the whole timeline out. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Whittington. Yes, just in terms of just to deal with your questions in part, in terms of the enabling works, the cost, that has come down. Do we have a final figure on that? Okay, so we'll get the final figure on that. It will be considerably less than the 7 million that we stated in the paper. So just to give you some reassurance, and I have consulted with David Coleman around the key decision and the wording of that, and it still gives us authority, even though the value is less, to crack on. So we're literally negotiating that as I speak. Just in terms of the Section 203, yeah, I fully understand your concerns. Just to give you a bit more reassurance around that, I want to characterise it as a managed risk. So there is no project that never has no risk. We were very cognizant of this back in February when we became aware of the full magnitude of what it is we had to do. So what we've been doing is we've been engaging with pretty much the full legal team at Legal Services Lincolnshire. We've had about 5 or 6 lawyers working on this over there. We've also consulted with external barristers, a number of external barristers, multiple times as well. The other thing, just to give the committee a number of reassurance, is that this isn't a power that we're using in isolation. This is a power that other local authorities have used to also override restrictive covenants. And we've very much used the same process that they have adopted to successfully use this power. So we have looked at their executive papers, for example, and we've made sure that our legal advice, yes, is independent and up to date, but equally, where other local authorities have done this, we've also effectively used the same route to make sure that we're not doing anything that is an outlier or would be different. And the other thing I'd like to say is in terms of the challenge, where that would come from, so it would come from an adjacent landowner, should they decide that their value of their site has suffered loss. Now, we believe, in the legal advice so far, is that there is no loss suffered by overriding the covenant, because yes, it's the wording of the covenant is around residential development, but we're not putting houses there. So this is a secure children's home, and the nature of the development is very different. It's sited on the site very sympathetically, and we don't believe there'll be any impact on the adjacent landowners. And also the adjacent landowners are varied, and a lot of them aren't getting in touch with us. But what we are doing is we are demonstrating a very clear evidence trail where we are getting in touch with them regularly. We're giving them every opportunity to get in touch with us. We're giving them every opportunity to negotiate compensation if that's what they want to do, so that should there be a challenge, we have a very strong case which says, well, actually that challenge doesn't stand because the local authority has acted reasonably, the local authority has taken every step and every step that it should have done to mitigate the risk and give the adjacent landowners the opportunity to have their say effectively. So I hope that provides you with some confidence.
Thanks, Chairman. I've just realised why I've not seen anything about the land value, because I'm using the electronic version on modern.gov and it doesn't have the pink papers. So I'm just wondering if somebody could provide me with a set of the pink papers, please. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's going to happen. Councillor Rowe, I believe you wish to come in at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to briefly speak in support of this. I am the visiting member for the current home. Whilst they do a superb job, it's ready to be updated. And I think this is a super project that enhances our reputation across the whole of the nation. It's going to improve the facilities for the children that are living there. And it's also going to enhance the working environment for all of our staff. So I can't promote it strongly enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks very much. Councillor Wright, I believe you have a question.
No, I didn't have a question, but I had a comment, but that has just mainly been made by Councillor Rowe. But as somebody that knows this site very well, then two things. One, I agree with Councillor Rowe that the existing centre, the staff do a fantastic job, but it's very dated. It's in the wrong place now. It's not a very good location. No room to expand, so it's obvious that we had to do something about it. With regards to the new site, then I would be very, very surprised if there was any detriment to any of the landowner. I can understand the covenant where it is, because we would not want residential in that place. It's restriction, it's landlocked basically, apart from one very really sort of an entrance exit point, which would be okay for this establishment, but not for residential in general. I think it's, I mean, and I have to, praise you on bringing the economic growth to that area with regards to this site. I can't think of a better place. No, I've seen this for a while. I've known about it for a while, and I think it's exactly what's needed in the right place. It makes good use. I'd be very surprised if there was an issue, as I say, legally with that covenant. The only thing I would say is that in negotiating and trying to get contact with various Sleaford area landowners, then good luck. I never used to be grey.
Thanks very much. Do we have any further questions, Councillor Gray?
No further questions.
If there are no more questions on the open report and appendices A to D, we'll now move to the exempt appendix E. Are there any speakers on the exempt? If not, we'll move to the proposal. No speakers on appendix E. Therefore, we can move to the proposal. And I therefore propose we support the three recommendations to the executive. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Wright. Thank you. The comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, to be passed on to the executive. And we will now vote on this item. You're voting on whether you support the recommendations to the executive and agree to provide the additional comments to the executive. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Any against? No. Any abstentions? No. Thank you. That is carried. Thanks very much. You wish to come in?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Can we just confirm that members have, with the exception of Councillor Whittington, who's now a senior, that members have had sight of Appendix E, just for the records?
I have all members had sight of appendix, so we're covered. That's great. Thanks very much. We'll now move on to item 6, which is the recommissioning of the portage service. This item can be found on pages 53 to 126 of the agenda pack. It's for pre-decision scrutiny prior to the decision by the Executive Councillor for Children's Services, Community Safety, Procurement and Migration between the 18th and 22nd of September 2023. And just to recap on the actions required of us, we're required to firstly consider the attached report and determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Children's Services, Community Safety, Procurement and Migration as set out in the report. And secondly, to agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive Council in relation to this item. The two recommendations to the Executive Councillor are set out on page 56 of the agenda pack. I would now like to invite Sarah Gregory, Commissioning Manager, Children's Strategic Commissioning, to present the report. We also have Charlotte Gray, Head of Service, Children's Strategic Commissioning, and Melissa Bennett-Shaw, Senior Commissioning Officer, in attendance to help answer any questions. So it's over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you'll see in the report, portage has been in Lincolnshire since the 1990s, provided by special schools who use their expertise to provide portage support and prepare eligible children for school. It is predominantly a home visiting service for children in their early years that have suspected or diagnosed special educational needs or disabilities, and where there is a learning difficulty, developmental delay, or physical difficulty impacting on the child's educational development. The current commissioning arrangements are due to end on the 31st of March next year, and these are summarised on pages 58 and 59 of your report pack. The commissioning review has also considered interdependencies with other relevant services that support the educational development of children in their early years, as well as relevant local and national priorities. And although portage isn't a statutory service, portage does support the council with a number of its statutory duties, which are also summarised in the report. The evidence is clear that early childhood development can have a positive impact on a child's social, emotional and educational development, and coordinated multi-agency support can improve young children's outcomes and life chances. As highlighted in the report, there is a rise in young children with an educational healthcare plan and children presenting with social, language and communication needs. Currently, there is an inequity of provision for portage across the county and an inequity of the service offer, and referrals are currently managed separately by the different providers. More children in receipt of portage support are being discharged sooner, and families who were able to access the service do highly value the support provided. However, demand for the service does remain high, but that demand varies across the county, and a number of the providers are operating caseloads that are above the National Portage Association recommendations. The review has highlighted the need for a single provider model, which will provide a more consistent county-wide offer that ensures staffing and funding resources are needs-led, with a single point of access for referrals. And this includes the need for robust partnership working with other relevant services. The recommended model is outlined in pages 63 and 64 of your report pack, and this includes there being a strong emphasis on coordinated and inclusive evidence-based portage workshops and group sessions that are delivered alongside the Best Start Lincolnshire Early Years and Family Service. This service was recommissioned in April this year and has a much more stronger emphasis on a more inclusive offer for children in their early years with SEND. Time-limited portage home-based support will remain a core offer, but only where there is an identified need and once workshops and group support offer is fully exhausted, unless, of course, there is an escalation of need or where a family is unable to travel. For children in receipt of active home-based support, transitioning into their early years settings or reception year, time-limited transition support will also be offered to an allocated key worker where there is an identified need, so that early year setting or primary school is more confident in meeting the needs of that child. Portage is funded through the high needs block of the Dedicated Schools Grant, and although the recommended funding for the future model is a cost pressure against the current funding allocation, the recommended model will better align the service to local and national priorities across early years health and social care, provide a greater consistency and equity of provision, and greater standards for all eligible children. Ensuring even more children in their early years and their families access the right support at the right time and by the right professional. The alternatives considered are outlined in the report, along with the reasons why these were not considered to be viable options. And it is imperative that the right support offer is provided to the children in their early years to ensure that their educational development needs are met. and not to recommission a portage service would likely result in a significant gap in provision and put more pressure on existing services, as well as increased pressure on the high needs block of the dedicated schools grant. It would also likely lead to a longer term impact on specialist provision and increased pressure on the council in meeting some of its statutory duties, as well as negatively impacting on the future outcomes for young children. The recommendations in the report is that the Executive Councillor for Children's Services, Community Safety, Procurement and Migration approves the recommissioning of the portage service from Lincolnshire Special Schools and Academies within the Lincolnshire Send Alliance. The current public-to-public commissioning arrangements for portage are allowed for under the public contract regulations, and to recommission through a public-to-public arrangement will enable us to continue that sector-led approach with special schools also utilising their expertise to support mainstream primary schools, whilst ensuring a collaborative approach to developing and embedding the recommended model, and ensure that the service fully aligns to current and future priorities for Lincolnshire children within their early years. And also that authority is delegated to the Executive Director of Children's Services in consultation with the Executive Councillor to take the decisions necessary in relation to the recommissioning of the service. Thank you, and I invite questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I omitted to mention that Melissa Bennett-Shaw, Senior Commissioning Officer, is in attendance via Teams and not present in the chamber. So thanks very much for that, Sarah. Can we have any speakers?
Yes, Dr. E. van der Zee.
Dr. van der Zee?
Thank you. Could you say something about the selection process of the lead provider and what targets they will be given and how those targets will be evaluated? Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll be the plan is, if the recommendation is approved, that we will approach the special schools within the Lincolnshire Send Alliance, and they will be invited to nominate a lead provider. And therefore we would then engage in discussions with that lead provider. We've developed a draft service specification in relation to what we would want to see from the service, and also clear performance targets and outcomes that we would want to see. Obviously, this would be a partnership collaboration agreement, so we would work in partnership with the lead provider to also identify anything else that they could offer from the minimum that we would expect to see, and also agree any other targets, outcomes that we would want to see as well.
Charlotte.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide some assurance that obviously we would be having those conversations with the Send Alliance, but as part of the review work, we have been engaging with special schools in advance of this, so we're confident that we would be able to find a lead provider based on the model that we are proposing.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whittington, I believe you have a question.
Yes, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. thanks for the presentation. To me, it makes perfect sense to recommission this service, because I know that sort of one of the central things that we try to do at LCC in children's services and also in adults social services as well is early intervention, to identify, in this case, children who need help in their early years. And by intervening early, it's better for the child, obviously, addresses a lot of their needs, but also then potentially stops them from needing far more expensive interventions later on in life. So I'm just wondering, because as I say, for me, it makes perfect sense both for the child and also for the budget as well. But it'd been just interesting if you could just let the committee know potentially what the impacts would be on children who currently receive the service if it wasn't there, and potentially the sorts of things, more expensive services they would then potentially have to access, because I think that's a really fundamental question, because for me, early intervention in everything we do is the key. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll start and then Charlotte might come in. Yes, so if that service wasn't there, we would have increased pressure on our SEND services and also on our other services that support children with early years. But that may mean that those services then can't meet quick enough the needs of those children, which then might mean that more children are either going into special schools or more specialist provision, that and whereby their needs could have been met within mainstream if actually that support had been provided to them sooner. And so integrating them within the, also supporting through that Best Start offer as well, it means those services can work together to support those children earlier. But yes, certainly there would be more children also potentially starting school with speech, language and communication needs that then is also then putting more pressure on our mainstream primary schools as well. Our speech and language services, they would see increased pressure as well. And so it would be that impact, and it would mean that more children have those needs because those services would be overwhelmed and therefore couldn't necessarily meet those needs quick enough.
Yeah, and I think the only thing to add is we know the sooner that we identify and intervene, we reduce the likelihood of children arriving at school not ready to learn. And we know that those children that start school at the age of 5 who are behind where their peers may be, the ability to then catch up is highly challenged within the classroom environment. Obviously, we know that education colleagues do a fantastic job and provide additional support. But for us, the sooner we can identify, it does then reduce the chances of children arriving at school unprepared. And for these children in particular, they have an identified need, and we hope that we can prevent them from needing to have an education, health and care plan, needing to attend a special school, because their needs have been picked up quickly and helped in those very, very early and formative years. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Gray, do we have any other questions? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Very brief one. Could officers advise how the cost pressure will be met? Because although in terms of, if you like, wider budgets, it's not the largest amount in the world, it's obviously a pressure that obviously the Children's Department is going to have in its budget. So how are we meeting that?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. We have got a strategic board in which we look at the cost pressures through our high needs block, which are separate to other council pressures. So we've been factoring that in and anticipating that this increased pressure will come through. What we hope is through our transformation work and strategies such as portage that we'll be able to manage the demand on the high needs block and meet it within its overall budget for the next financial year, which has increased by 3%. So overall, we should be able to map it into our budget moving forward.
Thanks very much. Councillor Baxter, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. It's only about the vocabulary, really. I'm new at this, and I can't find a definition of the word portage that has anything to do with this. Is it a Lincolnshire word, or is it an industry word? Is it a national industry word? And how can we get it into the dictionary, really?
Sorry. Yes, so there is a National Portage Association, and so it is considered that portage is classed as a home visiting support service. That's sort of the definition of portage. So yes, it is a national term, and there is a national association. So what we want to do is still keep that home visiting support there, but support families to access the more universal services first through the groups and workshops offer. Does that help? Sorry.
Thanks very much for the clarification. I think that was quite useful. Have you any further questions, Councillor Gray?
No further questions.
Can I just ask one question then? On page 63 of the report, it mentions the recommended model, will have a single point of access. I'm just seeking assurance, I'm sure members would like assurance as well, that this will not create a bottleneck and delay access to the service.
Do you want me to pick that? Yeah. So, yes, so the single point of access, we'll expect that to be managed by the lead provider of the service once we've had that further discussion with the special schools. And absolutely, we wouldn't want it to be a bottleneck, but that provider would then be responsible for looking at where those services come in, because also the reason we want, as it highlighted, we want a one provider-led model is so that they then move that resource staffing resource is flexible, so it moves to where the demands are in order to support those families sooner.
Great, thanks very much for the clarification. Any further questions from any member?
No further questions.
Okay, well then I propose to move on to the proposal, which is I propose that we support the two recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Children's Services, Community Safety, Procurement and Migration. Can I have a seconder, please? Sorry, I can't see. Councillor Matthews, sorry, I couldn't quite see you. So, Councillor Matthews, thank you very much indeed. The comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, to be passed on to the Executive Councillor, and we have had a number of comments made this morning. We'll now vote on this item. You're voting on whether you support the recommendations to the Executive Councillor and agree to provide the additional comments to the Executive Councillor. All those in favour, would you please raise your hand? Thank you. Any against? No. And no abstentions. Thank you, that is carried. Now, I know I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting we'd have a 10-minute break, but we're really racing ahead on this one today. And I think if members are agreeable, we'll carry on with the agenda, because we're well ahead of schedule on this. So thanks very much for that. We'll now move on to item 7, which is service level performance reporting against the success framework 2023 to 24, quarter 1. Now this item can be found on pages 127 to 136 of the agenda pack and sets out the quarter 1 performance for the service level performance measures in relation to children's services. Again, to recap on actions required of us as a committee, we're required to review and comment on the children and young people service level performance 2023 to 24 quarter 1. And I'd like to invite Joe Kavanagh, Assistant Director Early Help, to present the report. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, so I will start by just saying that I'm really pleased to be able to say that there is one measure that's exceeded its performance, 5 that have achieved their target or are within the tolerance range, and just one measure that hasn't achieved the target. So I think just start by saying that really reflects all the hard work and tenacity of all of our teams who work really hard to ensure that we get the best outcomes for children and young people, and that of our partners too. As you can see as well in the information that's provided, we are performing really strongly against our regional, national and statistical neighbours, which is, again, really good to see. And you can see in the individual commentary against each of the measures the efforts that our teams are taking to either improve or sustain the current performance. And each one sets out the kind of particular context for why there may be some challenges within those performance measures. So what I thought I would do was provide a little bit of focus on the area that hasn't achieved its performance target, and then spend the time on questions. So what I wanted to do was just firstly provide a little bit of information around the whole cohort of the 16 and 17-year-old children in care. I think it's fair to say that, as is explanatory by the age focus of the cohort, young people do move into this cohort as they reach the age of 16, and they move out of it at the age of 18. So quarter by quarter, that whole cohort of children in care does change as young people move in and out of that cohort, either because they reach a certain age or because they either start being a child in care or end being a child in care as their circumstances change. And the life story, I guess, for those young people in that cohort is all quite different. So I just wanted to sort of pause and focus on that for a second, really. So within that cohort, there will be some young people that have been in the care of the local authority for quite a long time. They will be in settled foster placements, there will be some in residential placements, some in supported accommodation, and some young people that have entered the care system at an older age. So we do have young people that present at the age of 16 or 17, maybe as homeless to the local authority because their relationship with their parents is irretrievably broken down, and despite our best efforts, we need to exercise PR on their parental responsibility on their half, and they enter the care system. There are also, as you know, young people that are entering the country as unaccompanied young people seeking asylum. So that the cohort and the needs of that particular age range of children in care are all quite different. As a consequence, the cohort of young people that are not in education, training and employment also changes quarter by quarter as young people either have a solution, or in college, have a place to attend college, maybe lose that college place. So quarter by quarter, the group of young people changes. And the makeup and background and circumstances of those young people also changes. And the solutions then for those individual children are all quite different. I think the one constant, and you can see that in the commentary, is the efforts of the virtual school. So as you know, our virtual school are there to coordinate education on behalf of the young people that are in care, and for each young person we'll have a personal education plan, and their role is not to teach or educate those young people. They're not a school made up of teachers, but they coordinate the efforts across our schools and colleges for those young people, and aim to break down any challenges that may need to be overcome for those young people. So it is an area of work that is a focus and a priority for us. We do know that we want young people to be doing the best that they can, and education is the best way that we can achieve that. But it is a measure that it has, as you can see by the graph, fluctuated quarter by quarter, and is something that is still our focus. So that's what I wanted to say, and then give you time for questions, which I'm sure there will be. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jo. Councillor Whittington, I believe you have a question.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. This is actually sort of on one target that's actually achieving its target, which is the number of children in care. Because yesterday at corporate parenting, we looked at a number. I know there's a few people who were attending that meeting yesterday. Currently, the number of children we had in care as of yesterday was reported as 747, which is a lot higher than it has been in the past. And I'm just wondering, because I see in the narrative that target is being has been amended. My question is around potential what risks we've got, because it seems for a variety of reasons, some of which Joe's just referred to in terms of the increase in the number of 16 and 17-year-old unaccompanied asylum seekers, sort of increased family breakdowns, and I'm sure the cost of living crisis may have something to do with all this as well. But it's just potentially, I see the risk in the number of children we need to take into care increasing, and obviously because obviously as well as the number of children in care, we also have another larger cohort of children that our staff are engaged with. So I'm just wondering. It's probably a question I've asked before, but it's that reassurance around, we know the numbers are increasing. It's just reassurance that we will be able to deal properly with the increase in the cohort. I know Ofsted says our children's services are outstanding, and they are, and it's fantastic. But I'm guessing the increase is going to put a risk. So it's just really how that risk can be mitigated and what steps we can take. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Heather, did you wish to comment at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Whittington. I think you're absolutely right. It is a risk, and it's a risk to the council, and it's compounded by the issue that we've got with placements currently nationally. So we know that nationally, placements for children in care have gone up rapidly in cost since the pandemic. And that means that actually even a small increase in the number of children in care can be a big increase in the financial pressure on the council. what we do know is that children's services in Lincolnshire work really, really hard to deliver early intervention to prevent those needs from escalating. We know we benchmark very low for the number of children that we have to bring into care, and we know that once those children are in care, they get a really good service from us, but it's expensive, and there is a real shortage of placements currently, so that is that's a real risk to us, and it means that we are looking for placements for children in care every single day. Whilst we've been in this meeting, we will have done searches for children coming into care. So I think I can provide the assurances that the children are very well looked after. I can also, as you know, Councillor Whittington, confirm that this council has protected children's services as much as it possibly can. It prioritises children's services. We have been given funding. We were given funding during the pandemic and then given time to kind of move through a trajectory to bring that funding back down to pre-pandemic levels. But the risk predominantly is a financial risk. There's an associated risk, which is around the availability of social workers and the availability of social workers to do the social work with those children once they come into care, and then also before they come into care. So that's something that we continue again to work really, really hard on. We've had our own in-house apprenticeship scheme, which is really beginning to reap benefits. We've had retention payments for our frontline staff to ensure that they're, as far as possible, not tempted to agency work, which we know can be very attractive to social workers. And then additionally, as you know, we're part of the Pathfinders, so we're in one of the 3 Pathfinders nationally that's looking at workforce reform. But I think that the risk is, my professional view is that we will need some central government intervention in the market to stabilise the costs of care for children that come into care.
Thanks very much, Heather. Dr. van der Zee, I think you have a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. If I'm well informed, we may be looking at about 2,000 asylum seekers in Scampton very soon. Of course, I'm very worried about the impact that may have on the level of service that LCC can provide. Did the government inform LCC in any way about the distribution of the potential age groups that we may be looking at? Is there any figures that have been given? Is there any financial support given in order to make sure that we are able to deal with that influx of service level users? Thank you.
Heather, are you coming back on that one?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. van der Zee, sorry. So basically, we obviously you know that the Lincolnshire was not involved in the decision to have Scampton become a large site. We have been working with the government. We have been looking at, with the Home Office, at how we can mitigate the risk of, because the risk to children's services is that we have people who come through that scheme, which is meant to be for adults, and then get to Lincolnshire and then say that they are a child. And what that means we are required to do is we are required to undertake an age assessment of those people. Now, some of those people will clearly be children, and other people we will either not be sure they are children or we will not agree that they are children, and that's a disputed age. At that point, we do an age assessment, so we have social workers who undertake the age assessment, and the age assessment will come to a conclusion about whether or not we believe them to be a child or not. If we do not believe them to be a child, they'll go back into Scampton. If we believe them to be a child, they'll come into care of the local authority. So the funding currently is to district councils, and it's £3,500 per place. And that's to fund the infrastructure that we'll need. It's to fund the support workers that will need to go in there. It's to fund the social work. It's to fund a whole raft of activity. In Lincolnshire, we've worked collaboratively with our district council to say there are some things we need to do up front. So, for example, we need a team of social workers ready to undertake social work assessments for the ages, and we need accommodation in which to do it as a result of the Kent ruling a couple of weeks ago. So I can assure the committee that's all in place. I can also assure the committee that we have been and looked at other sites where the mitigations they're going to put in place for Scampton have been put in place, and they seem to be having a fairly good level of success. So the number of young adults who are claiming to be children is not as high as, for example, those that are in the contingency hotels. It doesn't appear to be that high, but if I'm honest, this is really untested. So all I can say is we are well prepared, as well prepared as we can be, for people to start arriving at Scampton, and we will follow that process to ensure that we give them what they are needed. There are other pressures on the council which are not my area of expertise, around health protection, around supporting the site more generally, but for children's services, the particular pressure will be around age assessments. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Councillor Baxter, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. The first relates to the previous question from the doctor, so I'll ask that one first, if you like. And that is, firstly, how many children have we got that fall into this category of unaccompanied asylum seekers at the moment? And secondly, what are the challenges in terms of language? Do we have sufficient translators, or do we have what's the system for speaking to people in their native language?
Thank you. In terms of the number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children today, I haven't got it, because obviously some children will turn 18 this week, some will come in, but what we'll do is we'll do some messaging to make sure we've got a ballpark figure for you. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that now. In terms of the translation, so we have translation services in place. We've got a contract with translation services in place. And that's a legal requirement for all of the age assessments. We need to make sure that the young person understands the process that they're going through legally, and then understands the response to the questions. In terms of the language after that, so one of the things we found is really important for these young people. So once they are a child, it is determined that they are a child, then we have what we call an ESOL program. So we go to quite intense English language support for them, so that as they move forward in their life, either in Lincolnshire or elsewhere, we know that one of the most important things we can do for them is to develop their understanding of the English language. Thank you.
Do you have another question, or?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Going back a bit through the plan, I've understood target PI 25, which is about the average time moving from childcare. The target is shifting. I think I've understood that that's shifted because of the impact of COVID. If I'm wrong, please put me right. And then prior to that, PI 24, children who are subject to a children protection plan. As a newbie, could you please explain why it's a good thing that we have how do you establish a target? Because surely you don't want too many people on you don't want every child on a child protection plan, yet you've got a target which is we're achieving the target. We want 380 children on a protection plan. I don't understand.
Yeah, no, not a problem at all. I think it's not quite as simple as this, but I guess what our principle is across all of this is that we meet children and young people's needs as early as we possibly can. So ideally, as we've said already, really early intervention at early help levels, which is, universal, plus a bit of extra support from across the partnership. And then when we move into children's needs escalating, then we move into sort of statutory social work terms. So we have children on a child in need plan where there is a social worker involved, and hopefully all of their needs will be met, and they may then be supported in early help or by school or by universal services. For some children and young people, their needs aren't resolved, and the children on a child protection plan are those that are potentially at significant risk of harm from others, often within a family setting. So it may be that they're experiencing neglect, or there may be domestic abuse within the family setting. And so we have a statutory child protection partnership around that child, made up of police and health and ourselves as children's services. So children's needs change, but essentially we absolutely want to meet needs, work with a family, so that those needs are escalating and they don't stay on a child protection plan any longer than they would need to. But if we are concerned about their safety and the risks that they're placed at, then we would want them to be on a child protection plan. So some children stay on a child protection plan for longer than others, and we may need to continue to support that family for a long time. So that's why if children's needs mean they need to be on a child protection plan, we would want them to be on a child protection plan. But there is also lots of work that we do at a kind of strategic level around making sure that children's needs across the system are being met in the right place and that our services are having the best effect with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if I just add to that, so the target is based around regional benchmarking. It's based around the fact that we're usually a bit lower than regional benchmarking. And you're absolutely right, and it's really difficult, isn't it? Because we also don't want a target for children in care and a target. But these are about having a set of metrics that are an early warning system. So if you started to see them going higher than that, it would be out of kilter with our performance normally and our performance regionally. The word targets, I see exactly what you mean, particularly in terms of coming to it the first time, because it's also, we wouldn't want any entrance to the criminal justice system either. So the performance is set around regional and national benchmarking, our past performance. So if we've always performed better than regional and national, we don't go to regional and national. But it's an early warning system for you as a committee and for us as professionals to say, that one's not looking right, that one's going the wrong way, what do we need to change? In terms of the number of UASCs, we're looking at around
I was just getting today's figure.
So they represent about 9% of our children in care, so I'll get that. They've sent me in a percentage. I'll get you it as a raw figure as well. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Councillor Smith, you have a question.
Thank you. It's Dr. Vanzie's partially touched on it, so is Councillor Baxter around Scampden. How confident are we, Heather, on that percentage figure of the number of individuals who claim that they are children, and obviously the financial implication of that to the council? And also, does the recent change in law around the status of these individuals, I believe it's from July, make any difference to what we have to do statutorily? And what mechanism have we got that we can very quickly, if needed, go to the government and say, no, the money you're giving isn't cutting the mustard, we need more money if you want us to do this, rather than it being left to our coffers? Because quite frankly, we're having this thrust upon us, and we've been prudent with our finances, and I wouldn't want your team or any other part of the council's finances to get in a quagmire through no fault of our own.
Can I just confirm, Councillor Smith, was the first part of your question, how confident am I that the funding meets the need?
How partly, but also that the number of assessment, in percentage terms, I think you said about 5%. So we're not going to get a case of 30% like we are in other areas. How confident are you on that figure as well?
So in terms of the funding, so the age assessments are funded through the 3,500, and currently it has been agreed with the districts that funding's come forward. So I'm confident that what we've currently agreed will cover the cost of that. I am reasonably confident that we're not going to see numbers of age assessments spike to a point where that is unmanageable. I'm not totally confident, Councillor Smith, because I've never experienced this before. I think we've done all of the work to look at other areas and what happened, to project that onto the numbers we're getting, to then extrapolate what we think will happen in terms of age assessment. So I might at the next committee be telling you there's a significant pressure, but I don't believe that to be the case. In terms of the change of status, I think you're referring to the change of status around them being the unlawfulness of their entry to the UK. So I think we need to wait for that to play out. I think it will obviously make a really big difference to these young people who are really vulnerable and generally really it will be difficult because they'll come to us and as children they won't be, they will be within our care, and then at 18 they would then be likely to have to go to one of the large sites and possibly face deportation. So what we're planning around is how do we support them with that, and how do we plan for that. I think one of the risks is that they might be more likely to go missing, and that means they're more likely to be vulnerable. So that's something that we're very mindful of in terms of offering the support, but we're waiting for all of that to play through. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Matthews, I think you have a question.
I do, thank you. And Joe may be anticipating it, because thank you very much for your detailed feedback on that one. This was discussed at the corporate parenting scrutiny yesterday, and it became clear that this is a muddled area for Lincolnshire County Council staff, government policy, whether young people are 16, 17 or 18. But I think there's a really interesting story in the graph that you've presented here. So looking forward, I'm intrigued to know what's going to happen in Q2, for instance. But I wonder if you can just address this, which was what we were told yesterday. We were receiving conflicting information that UK-educated late entrant 17-year-olds into care were, on the whole, very unwilling to, not on the whole, that there was a significant proportion of those UK-educated 16, 17-year-old entrants into care that were unwilling or able to engage in education because of their personal history. Now, I get that. We were also told that unaccompanied asylum seekers who are in that 16, 17-year-old age bracket are very keen to engage in education on the whole, but were not able to engage in education because at the time that they entered the country on this quarter reporting, the schools were full or were not taking new entrants because of GCSE examinations, and presumably all of this 16, 17 sits in that year 11 age group. We were told that the virtual school isn't a virtual school, that what it is a commissioning service for personal education plans, but it does have funding to provide some personal tuition. I'm just intrigued if there's any more we can do at a time when schools with RAC are providing online distance learning for their pupils. Can we not commission online distance learning for year 11 pupils who cannot gain entrance to school because there's no physical, they haven't got to buy uniform, they haven't got to do anything, they're in safe and secure accommodation. So that's one question. So that's my first question. I would like us to invest more money in this. I think it's a serious issue that we're not underreporting, but we're reporting failure to meet a target despite our massive effort. So I'm not saying think outside the box. Secondly, what about home tuition? Does home tuition exclude them for reporting in this or not? Because we are, to a certain extent, providing home tuition. So could we, and I've asked for this several times, can we have a Lincolnshire commentary in this that says, actually 143% of 16, 17 are engaged in home tuition as funded and provided by Lincolnshire County Council, but this does not qualify to meet this target. So, and finally, yes, I think we were told 89 yesterday, because I pushed and pushed and pushed for numbers, and we were told 89, and I get that some of them might have turned 18, but not a massive proportion. And it was that precision to numbers that aggravated me, because it's all lost in that it's 3% or it's 25%, it's 89%. And actually, these are individuals, and we're losing the individuals within the percentages. And I share the worry about losing some of these individuals into the community where they disappear, or into vulnerability through all sorts of reasons.
Heather, you wish to respond?
Yeah. Thank you, thanks. And, you know, I share your concerns about these individuals, and I hear what you're saying about the precision to the numbers. 89 is correct, it's come through. So 89 is the number. Again, you're absolutely right. There is a lot of provision for these children which doesn't meet the reporting for this target. So we do have, as I said earlier, the English language lessons. We do have home tuition, but that is not counted, because what is counted is when they have a place in an educational institution. So what we can do is make sure that narrative is a little bit more defined, and we'll give you the breakdown of what people are getting. I can assure you, in terms of the staff and the frontline staff, they're not losing these children to the percentages. I understand at a strategic level when we're having these conversations, we talk in percentages. But I know if you talked to people in the virtual school, to the social workers, to the people who are looking at the provision for these young people, they are working really, really hard to ensure we give them the very best start to their life here. And that there is a lot of rich activity going on that doesn't meet this target. But I take your point that we could break that down into the narrative. And I think there is something as well about perhaps we want to run a bit of a workshop on this, and we look at really giving people a chance to understand the role of the virtual school, the role of these measures, because I think going forward, if we give you an opportunity to really understand that, then as these numbers start to change, as you say, as they start to come through, you'll have that context as well. So we could probably put something online and have the virtual school head come and also the children in care head of service come, so we can talk through that and make sure that everybody, because you yourself, Councillor Matthews, will have a more detailed understanding, because obviously you sit on corporate parenting panel, but I'm aware this is going to be a fairly new agenda for other members of the committee, so perhaps a workshop would be helpful.
You wish to come back, Councillor Matthews?
Well, I want to thank you, and it appears in trying to dig that I'm being awkward. I genuinely am not being awkward. I want to find a way for you to be able to tell the story for us to understand, which I think is what Councillor Kendrick has just said. This is a quarterly reporting process, and therefore, whilst there is continual churn, all of these children are tracked. So it should be straightforward to say 73 people joined, 73 young people joined, 63 were eligible, 23 were unaccompanied migrants, 23 were asylum seekers, 17, the numbers don't add up, but quarter by quarter, and if a pro forma was prepared for that during this period of government turbulence, we could at least know what's going on, because you're tracking that at that level. And please, can you let us know that as well? That'd be very, and that means categorisation, because I fear in this, the UK educated non-engagers are being lost. Thank you.
Yeah, just to assure, Sarah Lane is doing exactly that, following from yesterday. So, yeah, I think, and not perceived as awkward at all. Absolutely, it's what we need. The really strong scrutiny on this is something that we're all worried about, so appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Matthews, for raising that point. Councillor Wright, I believe you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Heather, I'd like to query something you said. I'll say query or challenge, whichever one you fits more comfortably. It's about the capacity to carry out the age assessments. Now, I'm being sent into bat against the Home Office on information that was slightly different to the way you portrayed it there, is that I'm told that we already suffer from pressures with regards to it. So I'm told that on average, a legal age assessment takes 2 social workers 40 hours apiece. There are no spare social workers in the East Midlands. I learned from the Strategic Migration Board meeting only this week. On top of that, we've got the Home Office now engaged in what they're referring to as SAP, the speeded up application process, which also puts pressures on anybody coming through the system. We really need to be even more quickly having to determine their age. So I'm being told on one side that there is capacity issues, and it's something we need to address and the Home Office need to deal with, because on top of that, you've then got a profession that people come into believing it's a caring profession. I can't legally challenge their assessment system. However, it's got to be seen as a potential flashpoint. I know it is being seen as a flashpoint, that if you're now asking people to make an assessment where somebody's maybe borderline a child, and their decision means whether they get to stay or whether they potentially get sent to Rwanda eventually, then that may just affect judgment and potential assessment variations, shall we call them. So I just wondered why you're saying that there isn't a capacity issue up till at that time, when actually I've been asked to go and tell everybody there is.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So we have had to recruit, and we have had to recruit from agency in order to get that additional capacity, and we haven't got the funding for that other than what's been agreed through the district. The bigger problem, so that's specifically about Scampton, and it's specifically about the the mitigations that we believe will be in place. And I guess it is going to be challenging. I don't want to give the impression that it's not challenging. It's compounded by the fact that we have the contingency hotels as well. So the contingency hotels yield a much higher rate of age assessments and a much higher rate of people who are age assessed to be a child. So at the moment, the yield rate that we have from the hotels that we currently have is extremely challenging. I guess it's difficult, isn't it? Because what I am saying is we have got provision in place to do age assessments from when those people start to arrive. But that is because of the cooperation of the district councils. And it's because of the fact that they've allowed us to do that recruitment on the funding that they've been given. We've not been given any funding for it. I think the other problem is there are no spare social workers in the East Midlands. I think the difficult thing is probably Lincolnshire as an employer is more likely to be able to get people to come to us. And so we probably, and we've reported this before, whilst I'm not saying there isn't a pressure on social work, there absolutely is. We do know we fared better. And we do know we play into the market better because people want to come to work for an authority that is outstanding because it feels safe, and they want to come and work for an authority that's a pathfinder. Your point on do they go into the profession to do age assessments, I think is an extremely valid one. Do I think we're going to have a problem with people who don't want to do age assessments over and over again? Yeah, I think we do. We've, as a leadership team, we've struggled and we've debated that because actually this is a role that has been decided falls to social workers, and there is a view that it's not social work determining someone's age. That's not. You're absolutely right. They come into this to make lifelong changes for families and children and young people. And I think linking back to Councillor Smith's point about the change in status, and I completely agree, it will become very difficult to give people who have come into what is a really challenging profession because they want to change lives the responsibility for deciding effectively if someone is deported or not. I think that will be very difficult, and I think that's something that we're going to be challenged by.
Thanks very much. This is clearly an ongoing issue that we need to keep a watching brief on this, I think, from this committee's point of view. Councillor Smith, you wish to make a comment?
Thank you, Chair. Just to expand on that, I think, Heather, you've hit the nail on the head. We run the risk of, you use the word, it is a safe place for social workers to work. We run the very real risk that image, because of what we've had foisted upon us, could go very, very quickly. We also, as you've already said, you were going to run, I mean, it's hard enough to do the jobs that the team do anyway. I've seen what they do. It's very difficult. You're going to get burnout, which is going to be quite a serious problem because, as you said, realistically, it's not actually really, if we're honest, what social workers go to social work to do, and it's not their place. I think the government needs to find a far better and quicker way than having two social workers spend 80 hours on one case between them to do this. I'm going to go back to a point Councillor Matthews made on British learners. That concerns me because this is not the first issue that we've had around, particularly those who are usually of a usually Protestant white working class background who seem to get forgotten and left by the wayside. I'm not saying that's by this council, it's a national problem, one that's been exposed by people in Westminster. What can we do, if anything, to stop that happening here? Because it's very concerning that, as Councillor Matthews said, there seems to be a huge difference and disconnect between those who are coming in who we have a statutory duty for and actually our own who are already here, when certain people would argue, well, actually our legal requirements aside, our first duty are to those who are here who are native, if you like. I appreciate the legal duty is very different and very clear that actually the duty, and quite rightly, the duty is to everybody, but the public perception will be, much like the other issue, will be, you could argue the public may deem or see preferential treatment even where there isn't any, and that's something we want to avoid.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Smith. I think you're absolutely right. The legal duty is equitable to anyone who comes into our care. They're in our care, they're our children, and we would want them to have equitable opportunities to progress. I hear what's been raised about the non-UAS 16 to 17-year-olds. It's something that we do work on an awful lot. Martin's led a huge programme around attendance. We know that's a real key, making sure that these young people, particularly boys, white boys from deprived backgrounds, a massive key to success in education is attendance. And Martin's got his team doing a whole programme on improving our attendance and working with schools and with school leaders around that. Where they're open to our services, because a lot of that work is led by schools. So if they're not open to children's services specifically, a lot of that work is led by schools. Martin's led work across our social work, across our health visitors to highlight the importance of education. We've done training with all our staff to say it's not good enough that a child, that you're just focusing on the family improvement, for example. You have to be focused on education as well. So we've done an extensive amount of training on that, and we need to start to see how that comes through. We know that as we recover from the pandemic, the disadvantage of the pandemic has been felt disproportionately to more disadvantaged people. So I think it's absolutely right. And as we develop that report and performer, we'll be able to unpick that a little bit more and look at what it is that we're doing. I also think there's something about making sure that we are matching the provision to those young people. Again, as Councillor Matthews said, some of these people, young people, when they come in to our care, are already very disengaged from education. So the job doesn't become about attendance, it becomes about re-engagement. We've introduced a team for emotionally based school avoidance that can work with these young people, and we need to continue to do more, because we really believe, as I know this committee does, that education is the key to people's future. And we invested a lot in the Caring to Learn programme, because we said once children come into care, it's not enough that they're safe, we need to give them a pathway to a brighter future. So we need to care about their learning as much as we do about making sure that they're safe in the care of the authority.
Very briefly.
Thank you. I believe from memory it was Ben Bradley MP who did a massive amount of research into this, and it's not just those in care, it's usually, as I say, that specific background, because for whatever reason they have a detachment to the education system because of how the system functions, which I appreciate is not anything we can do directly, but is that research that we've been looking at to sort of say to government, look, we can do X, but you need to do Y to help this cohort, because, as I said, too often they're the forgotten cohort.
Yeah, thank you. I can't comment specifically on that research. We do a lot of work with the Education Endowment Foundation, and we engage with the research that they're producing. And what they've done is really looked at what are the effective interventions for different cohorts of pupils. The work we need to do, I think, for those who aren't known to us, is through our schools. So we've got the Teaching School Hub that runs programmes. Martin will look at the performance of different cohorts of pupils every year to look at which cohorts of pupils are performing well, which are not performing well, and he will use that information to work with the teaching school hubs to shape the interventions for the next year. But I don't want to pretend, Councillor Smith, that we've got this cracked. We're really driving hard. We've had real success in the foundation stage this year, and the published data and confirmed data won't come through. But we have had, through the work that Joe Kavanagh's teams have led with nurseries and Joe's with Martin's with the foundation stage, we have seen our performance against national really improve. Now, if we're getting that right in the early years, we're really starting to build the building blocks that we need later. We know we do okay at the end of school at GCSEs. Where we really want to make the difference is Key Stage 2, and we've seen an impact of our work this year at the early years, and we want to see that moving all the way through.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gray. Do we have any further questions?
No further questions.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask one question, not wishing to labour the point, but the age assessment has been mentioned this morning. Is the process something which is prescribed by the Home Office that we have to follow?
Yeah, the process for age assessment is very prescribed, Mr. Chairman, and there's a reason for that, because obviously these individuals have a right to appeal. And if the process hasn't been followed in a way that is Merton compliant, which is the the compliance standard against which we have to do it, then then the age assessment won't stand. So we follow a very strict protocol around our age assessments, and we have our legal team involved in checking those before they're finalised. And as a result of that, we've seen less and less challenge to the outcomes of our age assessments.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, then I'd like to move to a proposal. I propose that the committee has reviewed the report and is satisfied with the children and young people's service level performance for 2023-24 quarter one, and I think a number of very important comments have been made by members which have been noted. So if you agree with that proposal, can I ask you to raise your hand, please? There's no one against, no abstentions. Thank you, that's agreed. Now, I know we postponed the break. I'm suggesting that we actually have the break after item 9 before we move into the final exempt session of the day. I trust that will be agreeable to everybody. So if we can move on then to item 8, which is Children, Young People Scrutiny Work Programme, and it sets out the work programme for 2023 to 24, and it's found on pages 137 to 143 of our agenda pack. And the actions required, as usual, are to review and agree the work programme as set out in the report, and also to highlight for discussion any additional scrutiny activity which could be considered for inclusion in the future of the work programme. I'd like to invite Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, to present the report. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Chairman. I've no changes to report to the published work programme. The next meeting of the committee is on the 20th of October. Just to highlight that we now have 4 pre-decision items to consider, and these are on the children and young people, online mental health support, the the Maple short breaks provision recommissioning, education provision planning, and Saxelby Primary School, a 3-class extension. In addition, there will also be an item on proposals for scrutiny review. So this is to identify potential topics for Scrutiny Panel A, which is about to complete their current review. Due to the additions of the pre-decision scrutiny items on October, we've had to move off some of the other sort of non-time critical items. So the Building and Communities of Specialist Provision Strategy will now be an information-only item, so it will be included on the agenda, but won't be for discussion at the meeting. But if one of the other decision reports comes off, we might be able to add it back on for discussion. The other items that were moved off was the Children in Care Transformation Programmes. This is now on the 12th of January agenda. The Youth Offending Service Progress Against the Inspection Recommendations is now an information-only item on the January agenda. And the Children's Services Annual Complaints Report is now on the 8th of March agenda. But otherwise, everything else is as it was previously reported to you. And happy to take any questions or suggestions, Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Councillor Matthews, you have a question or suggestion?
It's a suggestion. We just heard Heather say that they've had to commission external social workers to engage with the process of age verification. It would be really good if we could hear a report on the impact that is being caused on our services by the massive influx of individuals into Lincolnshire, living in hotels in Skegness and other areas throughout the county, and moving into Scampton, because I believe that will have financial repercussions for Lincolnshire County Council. And clearly we've had some small evidence of that we've had to appoint new staff to engage with these processes. It may be that it's all funded, but could we have that addressed as a specific item, please?
Heather, you wish to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think so Scampton doesn't impact on just children's, so I think we need to agree as a council where that reporting is going to go through, and I think that's something that if Councillor Bradwell was here, I would ask, but I think we need to just take that back, and I'll speak to the Chief Executive about it before we agree to that, if that's okay. I think we need one place to govern the impact of Scampton.
You wish to come back, Councillor Matthews?
I do, because Scampton is a subsection of the concern. So yes, there may be a report about Scampton and its wider impact, but I'm talking about young people entering Lincolnshire because of foreign activity or because of their own choice to asylum seekers, but the direct impact on children and young people's services. So not the wider adults or anything like that, because it's costing you money to engage with that process as required for young children entering Lincolnshire from other places.
Heather used to come back.
Yeah, no, that we can take that away. We'll take it away. I'll take it away and discuss it with the chief exec and come back.
If you would do that, because I think it's a very valid point that Councillor Matthews makes. Councillor Whittington, I think you were next.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think it's kind of picking up on what Councillor Matthews has just said, because obviously the impact of unaccompanied asylum seeking children is going to be not only on the education system, but on other children's social services, but also those children that are with their families in temporary accommodation, whether that's in hotels or wherever. You know, we know that there are problems in families. I'm just wondering, do we look at problems, you know, that might be existing within the new communities that are here? Because I can think of Grantham. Obviously, one of the hotels in Grantham has had a lot of families from Afghanistan there. We've got quite a substantial number of Ukrainians. Now, that's not sort of implying that families who've moved here from abroad have all got social problems within their families. But if we know that amongst British families, there have been a large number. You know, we know there are family breakdown issues. What work are we doing to identify those pressures in families that have come into the country? Because I'm guessing their families, regardless of where they're from, and they're going to all have the same sort of pressures. So, does our work sort of work with those communities who may also be experiencing certain problems within the families? And I'm guessing that the fact that they are in a different country might be exacerbated. I'm not saying they are, but just wondering, you know, it's making sure that we're not missing out on children that are suffering in families. Thank you.
Heather, you wish to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Councillor Whittington. So in terms of the groups of families you just described, in terms of the Afghan families and the Ukrainian families, those children are in school and those adults are linked up to services, so our normal safeguarding procedures apply. So I can assure you that you're right, there are some of those families who require intervention from children's services, and that is happening. They require the services of our health visiting team if they've got young babies, and that's happening. So regardless of where they are accommodated, once they are a Lincolnshire resident, they receive the Lincolnshire services in the same way as the rest of Lincolnshire's population, and we are picking up where we need to pick up on those issues. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think Councillor Wright, did you have a comment to make?
Only briefly, Chairman. I'm just listening to, you know, the sort of thoughts and where things should be seen. I think it's very important that, especially on asylum, and I've got mixed feelings about whether Scampton should be here, because that's almost admitting that we know that the Home Office are not going to process them correctly at entry, and we are going to have children when it's meant to be up to 2,000 men, not children on site. So that does worry me, what the political, with the small p, implications are of us sort of already getting ready for children when they shouldn't be there. I think there has to be a link into other committees on this, because it's such a fast-moving programme. It changes week by week. It's always reactive. Never proactive. That's the nature of dealing with the Home Office and asylum. And so it's very difficult, I think, for officers here to produce the kind of reports that might be looked at when the data from one day could have changed by the next, and the expectations have certainly changed by the next week. So it's just a bit of a sensitive area, I think, at the moment.
Yes, thanks very much. As you say, it's almost a cross-committee issue, isn't it? And I'm sure Heather will take that back and discuss it with the Chief Executive and try and come to some sort of arrangement. Do we have any other comments on the work programme?
No other comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I therefore propose the work programme is agreed, and obviously we've had the additional comments this morning on certain issues that are going to be taken back. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you agree with that proposal? Thank you very much. We now move on to item 9, which is exclusion of the press and public. Item 10 on the agenda contains exempt information, and we will now need to vote on whether we go into private session. I propose the following motion, that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sear. Thank you, Councillor. We'll now vote on this motion. We're voting on whether you support the motion to exclude the press and public for the remainder of the meeting. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We will now pause the live stream and we'll have the 10-minute break and resume at 10 to 12. So resume at 10 to 12. Thank you very much.